The crowd roared outside the National Palace of Burkina Faso as President Ibrahim Traoré prepared for his highly anticipated Independence Day banquet, a meticulously arranged diplomatic affair that brought together foreign dignitaries, military commanders, and political rivals under one opulent roof. 100 feet away, hidden in the kitchens below the grand marble staircase, an old woman named Mariam Diabaté, her hands calloused from decades of grinding millet and peeling cassava, shuffled slowly between the silver platters. At 70, Mariam had worked in silence for years as a cook's assistant, always overlooked, always underestimated. Until today, she had noticed something odd in the menu preparations, a subtle change in the ingredients list for the president's grilled lamb with peanut sauce, his favorite dish. A pinch of cassava leaves substituted for parsley. It seemed innocent enough to the untrained eye, but Mariam's instincts, born of a lifetime in village kitchens, screamed otherwise. She watched the sous chef, a young man with nervous eyes and sweat-soaked brows, fumble with the seasoning. When she quietly asked who had approved the change, he stuttered. It was special instruction from the head chef. Mariam had worked with Chef Gora for over a decade. He was methodical, obsessive, never deviating from standard recipes, especially not for the president. Suspicion bloomed like wildfire in her chest. She feigned dizziness and was dismissed by the younger staff, slipping quietly into the dim hallway that led to the staff lockers, where she found Chef Gora's personal notebook, a habit of his to write every menu detail for high-profile meals. The handwriting for the lamb recipe was subtly different, a forgery. Her heart pounded. Back in the main hall, the music started as President Traoré entered, waving to the crowd, unaware of the danger sitting warm under a polished silver cloche. Mariam, torn between loyalty and fear, pushed open the double doors to the banquet hall, her worn sandals echoing against the tiled floor, drawing surprised glances from security. "Monsieur le President," she cried out, breathless, her voice cracking through the chamber like a whip. The music stopped. Guests turned. Traoré, confused, narrowed his eyes. Security moved toward her, hands to earpieces, but the president raised a hand, let her speak. Mariam stepped forward, knees shaking, palms sweating. "They are trying to kill you. Someone tampered with the lamb." Gasps rippled across the room. Gora, standing nearby, visibly paled. Traoré gestured toward a food taster. The plate was taken, tested, and moments later, the taster collapsed, foaming at the mouth. Panic ensued, screams, chairs toppling, phones flashing. Gora bolted. A soldier tackled him mid-run. He screamed, "I had no choice. They threatened my son." Chaos surged in waves as the president was whisked out of the room. Mariam stood still, shaking, as the man she had saved looked back at her one last time before vanishing behind bulletproof doors. Later, in a quiet holding room, she sat across from Colonel Abubakar Sissoko, the president's top intelligence officer. "Who else knew?" he asked, eyes sharp. "Who sent the fake recipe?" Mariam whispered, "I don't know, but they are inside your house." Sissoko leaned forward. "This doesn't stop here. You understand that?" She nodded. "Good," he said, "because now you work for us." Outside, the capital blazed with rumors, and in the shadows of government buildings, new alliances were forming, old ones fracturing. Mariam Diabaté, who once fed ministers and generals without a name, had just become the most dangerous woman in Burkina Faso. They moved Mariam to a safe house just outside Ouagadougou before dawn broke, its crumbling stucco walls hiding decades of secrets known only to those high up in the intelligence directorate. Inside, she was met not with comfort but with silence. Her only companion, a former field operative named Kasi, a man of few words and even fewer smiles, whose face bore the scars of a dozen failed coups. "You're not a guest here," he said dryly, handing her a tray of boiled yam and mint tea. "You're a weapon." Meanwhile, the political apparatus that had nearly crumbled under the weight of the attempted assassination began pulling itself together, but not without blood. Chef Gora died that night in custody, officially suicide, unofficially silenced. President Traoré remained in the shadows, his public appearances cancelled, his ministers scrambling for control, each issuing conflicting statements on his condition. But it was Colonel Sissoko who took full command of the internal investigation. And Mariam, for the first time in her life, was briefed like a high-level asset. The forger's handwriting on the recipe matched someone with access to the presidential archive room. Only 5 people in the country had that clearance, a mole. Sissoko paced the concrete floor of the briefing chamber, throwing dossier photos onto the table in front of Mariam. "Look closely," he ordered. "Which of them visited the kitchens this week?" Mariam's eyes hovered over the photos. Deputy Minister Salafu, Trade Envoy Kader, General Bauma, and 2 others. Her finger paused over Kader's image. Him, he walked past the scullery on Wednesday, smelled like foreign cigarettes. That detail lit a fire in Sissoko. He's a smoker, but not just of cigarettes. He muttered, snapping fingers for his aide. "Bring me Kader's foreign itinerary, every trip, every contact." As the web unraveled, it was clear. This wasn't a local conspiracy. Kader had recently returned from a conference in Côte d'Ivoire, where he'd met with representatives of a French-backed private defense firm, known unofficially for removing unfavorable African leaders. Mariam, now swept fully into the machinery of espionage, insisted she return to the palace kitchen, not as a worker but as bait. Sissoko resisted, but the president himself, in a rare private call to the colonel, approved the plan. "She's the only one they underestimated," he said. "They'll try again." The second banquet was announced as a show of strength, an illusion of stability. But this time, every dish, every plate, every pair of hands was under surveillance. Mariam walked through the hall as though nothing had changed, though her apron was now stitched with a hidden mic and her spice pouch rigged with a tiny GPS tracker. At 6:43 p.m., as she prepared the ceremonial stew, she noticed a faint layer of shimmer in the cumin jar, too smooth, too light. She palmed it, stepping behind a column, whispering, "We have a second attempt, confirm presence of compound in spice container." Instantly, Sissoko's voice cracked through the earpiece. "Copy that. Proceed with Protocol 13. In the observation room above the kitchen, agents watched through mirrored glass as Mariam handed the cumin jar to Kader's personal aide, pretending to ask for a refill. The young man hesitated, then bolted. Agents swarmed, caught, interrogated, broken. He confessed everything. Kader had orchestrated the poisoning with a foreign handler codenamed Le Corbeau, the Raven, a former DGC operative now working for a shadow organization seeking to destabilize pro-nationalist African leaders like Traoré. The aide had one mission left: deliver a USB drive during the banquet to a foreign journalist embedded in the press pool. Mariam stood quietly as the weight of what she had unearthed grew larger, deeper than food or politics. Sissoko paced again, furious, turning to Traoré in a secured line. "Mr. President, this is war." Traoré's voice, calm but grave, answered, "Then let the old woman lead our first battle." And so Mariam Diabaté, once known only for her pepper stew, was quietly tasked with intercepting the journalist during the next diplomatic summit, with a forged USB in her apron pocket that would turn spies into prey and smoke out Le Corbeau. But someone else was watching too. In the flicker of a security monitor deep in the communications wing, a cloaked figure took screenshots, lips curling into a smirk. "So the peasant woman thinks she can outplay me," the voice whispered in French-accented Mossy. "Let's raise the stakes." The summit began under the blazing West African sun, in a glass-walled pavilion surrounded by soldiers in ceremonial dress and journalists with press badges hanging like nooses from their necks. Banners fluttered, drones buzzed overhead. President Ibrahim Traoré, dressed in a dark navy agbada with golden embroidery, took center stage beside his Ghanaian and Togolese counterparts. The air reeked of diplomatic tension masked by applause. But behind that curtain of pageantry, war was quietly being waged, not with guns or tanks, but with whispers, glances, and codes embedded in USB sticks. Mariam Diabaté, clothed now in the uniform of a catering matron, maneuvered through the service corridors like a ghost, her movements choreographed by instinct and an earpiece feeding her constant updates from Colonel Sissoko. Target en route, press badge 704, blonde wig, black-rimmed glasses. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from something older, rage. She had seen foreign hands meddle in her country's soil before, in her youth, when her brother was dragged from a protest and never returned. This time, she would not let history write the script. In the open-air banquet, the journalist appeared exactly as described, smiling politely, camera slung over her shoulder, accepting a chilled ginger drink from an agent posing as a waiter. Mariam approached with a tray of small tarts, the forged USB hidden inside a hollowed pastry. "Dessert, madame?" she asked, eyes narrowed. "Merci," the woman said, grabbing the tart without suspicion. A quiet buzz in Mariam's ear. "She's moving. Trail her." Mariam followed at a distance as the woman slipped toward the staff toilets, texting feverishly. From the balcony above, Sissoko watched, flanked by two armed operatives. "Now," he said. Within seconds, agents converged on the corridor, but too late. The woman had vanished. Mariam stood staring at an open bathroom window, her pulse racing. "How?" she whispered. "Diversion." Sissoko spat. "This was never about the USB, it was about seeing who we'd send." Then came the message, a burner phone left in the trash bin outside the window, a video file, Mariam's face entering the press area. A robotic voice overlaid, "You've declared yourself a player, Mariam Diabaté. Now you'll learn what it costs to play in our league." Simultaneously, the security feed from the president's residence went dark. Emergency lights flared, multiple systems breached, shouted a technician inside the intelligence war room. "It's a coordinated cyber attack." And then came the chilling report. Traoré's motorcade never reached the safe house. For a breathless 5 minutes, no one knew where the president was. Mariam felt the world tilt under her feet, until her phone vibrated. A photo. Ibrahim Traoré, gagged, bound, his eyes filled with defiance. The message read, "Trade her or bury your president." The room fell into stunned silence. All eyes turned to her. Mariam looked around, meeting Sissoko's stare. "They want me." The colonel clenched his jaw. "They'll kill you." She nodded. "Yes, but they'll kill him first if we hesitate." A plan was hastily drawn. A staged exchange at an abandoned phosphate mine near Kaya, overseen by 2 teams. One to monitor, one to intercept. Mariam insisted on going alone to the site. She was wired but unarmed. As night swallowed the Sahel, she stood at the edge of the mine, watching a convoy approach under moonlight. From the shadows stepped a tall man in a tailored black suit, face obscured by a desert scarf. "Le Corbeau," she breathed. He chuckled. "And you must be the witch, cook who ruined my entree." He held up a small remote. One wrong move and his heart stops. Behind him, Traoré was dragged into view, weak but conscious. "You knew we'd come," Mariam said. "Of course," Le Corbeau sneered. "You're predictable, like all patriots." But before he could finish, Sissoko's voice crackled in Mariam's ear. "Now!" Explosions lit the ridge. Agents poured from the cliffs above, snipers zeroed in, but Le Corbeau was ready. He detonated smoke charges, tossed the remote to a mercenary and vanished. Bullets tore the night. In the chaos, Mariam ran to the president, cutting his bonds with a broken bottle shard. Blood soaked her hands. "Get up, child," she whispered. "We must leave." The convoy was decimated, but Le Corbeau escaped and his remote was gone. Back at the capital, medics worked on Traoré. He would survive, but barely. In the debriefing room, Sissoko slammed a folder on the table. "He's in the wind, and now he knows her face." Mariam sat in silence, staring at the blood under her fingernails. "He called me a witch," she said softly. "He has no idea how right he is." Outside, in a European embassy with diplomatic immunity, Le Corbeau poured a glass of wine, smiling at a blurred photo of Mariam. "Let's see what you do next, grandmother." 3 weeks after the failed assassination, Ouagadougou had become a fortress of silence. Streets once alive with the buzz of motos and laughter now echoed with the cold stomps of military boots. Martial law clung to the city like smoke. President Traoré, though recovering, remained secluded inside the heavily fortified National Military Hospital. His survival was being portrayed as a divine act of providence by state media, but Mariam Diabaté knew better. She had seen the look in his eyes that night, one not of a savior, but a man saved by someone else. She sat now in a Spartan room in the basement of the Presidential Guard's headquarters, surrounded by files, audio intercepts, and grainy satellite images. Colonel Sissoko entered, dropping a classified folder marked Operation Owley. He looked haggard. We found where Le Corbeau fled, off the grid in Côte d'Ivoire, backed by a French PMC, protected by diplomats. We can't touch him. Mariam glanced at the map, tracing her finger to a red circle in the Sassandra rainforest. Then we burned the forest, she whispered. Sissoko hesitated. You're a civilian and 70. I'm not a civilian, she snapped. I'm what you people never expect. A witness with nothing left to lose. Plans formed rapidly. A covert task force was assembled under the radar. No uniforms, no flags. Mariam insisted on joining. She cooked for them, listened to them, became their center. At night, she read files by kerosene light. Dossiers of sabotage, murders, double agents. What began as vengeance sharpened into something colder. Purpose. 2 weeks later, the team infiltrated Côte d'Ivoire under the guise of aid workers. Mariam wore the same dull gray scarf she had when she'd buried her husband 40 years ago. They reached the compound at midnight. Jungle insects buzzed violently. Guards patrolled, but they were drunk on arrogance. One by one, they felt tranquilizers, knives, blunt force. Mariam waited in the center courtyard where Le Corbeau kept his grand tent. She stood beside a fire pit, hands trembling. Then he appeared, still elegant, still smug. I knew you'd come, he said. I knew you'd talk too much. She replied. He approached slowly, clapping. You're not like the others. You don't hide behind symbols. No, she said, stepping closer. I hide behind time. From her apron, she pulled out a vial. Clear, odorless, ancient, a little gift from the north, she said. Do you know what this is? He scoffed. Poison again? No, she said, pouring it into his whiskey. Justice fermented. Le Corbeau raised an eyebrow but drank anyway, forming dominance. 10 seconds later, he froze, staring at her. You. He gasped, not poison. She whispered, memory, a toxin that amplifies guilt. You'll relive everything for hours until your brain collapses. He dropped to his knees, retching. Why? He choked. Because. She knelt beside him, eyes burning. You killed my brother in 1973. Wagga University. You ordered the fire. Recognition finally dawned on his twisting face. That was you. No, she whispered. That was your mistake. By dawn, Le Corbeau lay dead. The jungle compound burned, and the task force vanished like ghosts. Back in Burkina Faso, President Traoré, now walking with a cane, stood before the nation. We were attacked not by outsiders, but by the arrogance of those who think Africa is theirs to manipulate. Cameras flashed, and then, breaking protocol, he stepped aside. Mariam walked forward. The crowd gasped. This is the woman who saved me, he said, voice shaking, not once, twice, and for that, I stepped down for her to speak. Mariam stood before the microphone, gaze calm. I am not a politician, she said. But I've fed them for 70 years. I've watched them come and go. Let this be a lesson. Never underestimate what we remember, because in the end, memory is stronger than power. She walked away without finishing. Crowd stood silent, and in the hush, a seed of something new was planted. Not fear, not revolution, but the terrifying power of an old woman who remembered everything and chose to act.